Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we have Carlos Eberhardt. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thanks. This is going to be a lot of fun, I hope.
I'm super excited to hang out, learn something from you. So before we get to that, though, let's talk a little bit about you. For folks who are not familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Carlos Eberhardt. I work at a company called StepZen now, sort of a early startup, and we're building a product that kind of helps create a single API out of a bunch of different data sources. In the past, I've done a lot of different things. Spent most of my time, kind of formative years, I guess, at a large retailer in the Minneapolis area, doing a bunch of different roles. And from there, slid over into sort of the more enterprise software world, working for an API management company that got acquired, and now we've started something new.
Great, great, great. And so we talked a little bit about we're getting some love for your T-shirt in the chat.
I didn't even plan it.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. I see a lot of names. Brandon, hey, what's up, Brandon? Welcome back. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about StepZen and kind of the problem that it solves. So maybe we can start with the problem, and I'm going to take a crack at framing this. So the challenge that I see myself and others run into when we start taking this new exciting world of headless by storm is that there is a service for everything. If I want to take payments, I can go grab Stripe right now. I can go set up a store with BigCommerce or Snipcart or Shopify. I can set up a blog with Contentful or Strappy or GraphCMS or Prismic or Sanity or any of these, right? I can set up, all sorts of different services. I can stand up my own APIs. I can reach into APIs from, all sorts of other services that I'm using to manage my stuff. And this is really powerful. It means I can build anything and I don't have to learn how to build these backend services. But the challenge comes that I now am, instead of managing like one data source, which was that's the promise of monolithic apps. When you hear somebody talk about why a monolith is a good thing, actually, what they mean is it's all in one place. You know where everything is, you know where it's coming from, you know where the code is. And this distribution via headless gives us a lot of benefits. There's a huge number of reasons why going to this decoupled architecture and going API first, there are benefits, but the challenge is we lose that benefit of knowing where everything is and where everything comes from. So that's the challenge. Do you want to talk a little bit about how, well, first of all, did I get that right? Is that the right challenge that StepZen's here to solve?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. I mean, you could argue that challenge is what some of the old API management processes and companies tried to resolve too, right? I've got a bunch of different systems and I want to put a facade on top of them, so
Right.
it's easier to access them and manage them. We didn't really see that happen a lot with sort of in the enterprise space anyway, with companies that kind of adopted an API management. They didn't necessarily do, I'm going to build a single API for an app and it's going to compose everything that it needs. And I think that's what we're seeing as being a really powerful pattern for some of these, as you said, kind of these headless sort of app situations where instead of having to manage, the logic of mixing data sources together, or even sometimes it's business logic, with in for example, the Jamstack world, you've got sort of front end markup and then you've got APIs on the back. And if those APIs aren't connected together, you're doing that on the front end. And that leads to a lot of sort of sketchy stuff happening. So we think that you can take, and specifically, we think that GraphQL is really well suited to solve this problem. And as long as you can kind of get everything into a nice GraphQL schema, you've got one endpoint, and you can do all of the sort of API management things you need to worry about in terms of protection and authorization and everything on a single endpoint, and either spin that up very easily for a single app or reuse that for multiple apps. There's a lot of flexibility that you get in doing something like this.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for the sub, by the way, Cassidy. Welcome. So this is actually, you're bringing up something, and this is a little bit of like a hot topic that I see come up from time to time, which is the concept of GraphQL in general. And it seems like there are two extreme views on GraphQL. And then a lot of use cases kind of fall in the middle, but the extremes seem to be something like what you're talking about or what Gatsby talks about, where the idea is that GraphQL is the right solution in the majority of cases. It simplifies things, it unifies things, etc. And then the other argument is that GraphQL is almost always an overcomplication. And so, depending on who you're talking to or which developer whose story you're reading, it feels like you're going to get two very different takes on GraphQL and its utility and its value in a system. Yep. So I would love to actually just dig into that a little bit with you. When you're thinking about GraphQL, you said that, GraphQL is the right abstraction for this. What do you see as its strengths, and like what are the trade-offs and why are they worth it?
Yeah. Well, just first off, I was in the camp that said this is when GraphQL first came out. I was working at this API company, and I was a recovering Rastafarian in terms of hypermedia and everything like that. So when GraphQL came out, I thought, oh, this is a disaster. Everything's a post. You're posting when all you're doing is retrieving data. And it just seemed like it was overcomplicating things. And what really switched it for me was when I started looking at, and I think that is still fair, if I had a single API that I was working with that was a nice, clean REST API and easy to use, I think that I would.
I know, yeah. We're sorry, you're on a timer here. We're about to drown.
I think I would maybe lean towards saying, you know what, maybe REST is okay because everything's covered there. But as you mentioned kind of at the start, nowadays there's so many different systems that we end up talking to with a lot of different apps. And what GraphQL makes really nice is moving that connection logic or the joining logic to the back end so that the front end doesn't have to worry about it. And you can control that, I think, a lot better at the back end as well. So you don't have to suddenly start worrying about, okay, where are my keys for all these different systems? Are they living somewhere I need to pay attention to, or can I hide that somewhere? So I think I've sort of moved away from thinking that it's an overcomplication just through usage. And I think I don't want to decide for anyone else, but I have a feeling that if you tried that as someone who was like, oh, this is overly complicated, if you could play with it in sort of a simple way, you'd start to realize that it's actually not that overcomplicated. And another thing that you can do is you can simplify your schemas. So you don't necessarily have to build a monster schema that has every field in the database, every table in the database. If it's easy enough to do, you can make multiple schemas and tune them for what you need to do. So you can kind of simplify even the complexity of the schema itself.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that you brought up there was this idea of like the complexity of it, right? And what I really have, like, my argument in favor of GraphQL is that it takes away the need for every front end team to understand the full complexity of setting up data access for every instance. And what I like, like, when you're talking about any implementation, very rarely are we talking about actually removing complexity entirely. Usually what we're doing is we're moving it somewhere else that's less cumbersome to manage.
Yep.
And what I've seen with GraphQL is that we've taken this complexity that was at the UI layer. Everybody who worked in the UI needed to be aware of and manage this complexity of, this is where the data comes from, this is what the actual URL of the endpoint is, this is the authentication schema for each one of these endpoints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you had to like deal with that and keep track of it and share these tokens around. When you move it into GraphQL, what you've done is you've taken that away from all the front end developers who aren't dealing with the middle tier, the data access. They don't have to care anymore. They just have to go explore the data through the GraphQL endpoint, pull out the stuff they need, and then they get to build, they get to work, and all that complexity moves down to just the set of developers who are actively managing GraphQL itself. And because that gets centralized, you get this ability to do better caching. You get the ability to do better security. You get the ability to, all these benefits kind of fall out of consolidating that complexity into one domain. And that to me feels like where GraphQL really starts to shine is if I don't want every developer on my team to have to know about or care about auth. That's a hard concept when you're a first year developer to have to figure out like where do I put headers in request?
Right? I mean, the more you make everyone know everything, the risk goes up for people doing the wrong thing. That's a very enterprise thing to say, but it's kind of how it is. There is a bit of a risk. I know it's super important that you mentioned kind of moving complexity around, because in my experience, from talking to front end devs who consume APIs and things like that, they're very good at designing sort of just what they need on a front end. Also, in my experience working with a lot of back end folks, they're not necessarily as good at designing those interfaces, right? It's like, I have a database here, I'm going to expose everything. That was one of the things we always used to talk about, was that there is sort of a different opinion of an outside in versus an inside out approach. And if you move the design and curation of that API all the way to the back end folks, you're more likely to get sort of an inside out interface, which doesn't necessarily make things simpler.
Sure.
Right? I when I was at the retailer, we had a product table that probably had 1,500 columns, all kinds of different stuff with weird code names that meant different things to different systems. You don't want to just barf that out to your front end devs because it doesn't really make sense for them. And it doesn't make sense, especially if you're working with, as we see more and more now, you're working with third party companies who are building things for you, building mobile app experiences, whatever it happens to be. You don't want them to have to learn all of your internal knowledge about how things work. So I do think that there's still value in sort of creating that facade-like layer, but with a GraphQL API. So simplify what the front end folks or the consuming side needs to know, and also give the complexity and capabilities to the back end so that they can make sure that essentially, hey, this is a really nice clean API. It's also secure. We can optimize it, et cetera, and we can adjust it over time, right? We can change how this API is implemented, which systems it's talking to. If I switch maps providers or mapping geolocation providers, I can just swap that out on the back end, and the front side never needs to care.
Right. Yeah. And I really do love that part of GraphQL, that, we have the ability to simplify, to augment, to extend the data sources that are in the background in a way that doesn't need to modify the underlying system, in a way that doesn't need to mess with the front end devs. We can't, like, as you said, like, it's kind of a bad idea to just expose like unlimited fields to a front end dev, because we'll use one for a purpose. We need a unique identifier, so I'll throw in this whatever field that kind of looks like an identifier. It appears to be unique for everybody, but we don't know what that field actually is, and then something goes weird and we've accidentally broken stuff, and so it causes a lot of like confusing issues. And so I do love this idea of again, when we consolidate this control, we can make thoughtful decisions about it. One of the big challenges I had when I was at IBM, for example, is we had dozens of teams, and each of these teams controlled one part of a moving system, and all of them were evolving at the same time. So at any given moment, you were likely to see a new release of at least one of those teams per day. And usually those would include something that would augment the way that your system worked. Most of the time you didn't touch it, but sometimes you'd get this unexpected break. We didn't have a good way for all these teams to speak to each other, because, if you've got 30 something points of contact, the complexity of getting each of those teams to actually have high context communication with each other, it's not a tractable problem. You can't do it.
Yep.
But what we could do by centralizing to GraphQL was make it easy for each team to say, okay, we can communicate to one team, to the GraphQL team, that we've made a change. And the GraphQL team could make sure that we deprecated the field properly, that we added the right abstraction, that we made it really possible for somebody to immediately understand, like, oh, this field that I'm using now throws a warning when we try to access it from the UI, and it says, hey, this field's deprecated, you got to use this one, here's a link. Then it would go to the change log for the team that made the change. We just started to see it as almost like it was the right intermediary, because it didn't cause extra work for the backend teams because the GraphQL team built that abstraction on top. It caused less work for the UI teams because things were predictable. They were in one place. Mm-hmm. So that less work for the UI teams justified the existence of the GraphQL team, and ended up with us being able to move much, much faster. Yeah. So, oh yeah, Anthony's posting the project that we did. Gramps was the name of the project. This was before things like GraphQL had federation and schema stitching and things like that. So we built a really kind of hacky implementation at IBM of just kind of throwing everything at the wall and trying to make it work. And it was good. Like, it was a plugin based schema thing. But yeah, so anyways, that's like, as you probably tell from the way I'm talking about this, I fall more on the, like, GraphQL is often a good abstraction, and worth the effort of adoption. But yeah. Anyways, just kind of thinking about that. So StepZen, how does StepZen, I guess, like, when we're talking about the unique advantage here, it's using GraphQL. How does it make it easier to do the things that we've been talking about, these kind of central abstractions and auth management and all that stuff? Yeah.
So there are a couple of things that we do, without going into too much, feature diving talk, and we look at some stuff later on. Maybe we can get into that. But essentially, it's a configuration driven system. So you don't have to write code for resolvers and things like that. So if you have a database, there's a configuration, a GraphQL directive on how to connect to that database. And we put some intelligence into the system that says, oh, okay, if you're talking to this database, what table? And if you design a schema on top of that, we will coerce what comes back into that schema for you. So it's essentially just I'm defining my SDL, and then I'm using some custom GraphQL directives that says, okay, StepZen, here's how you fill this SDL when you get a request for this type. And then we've got a few other sort of constructs. It's not, I don't think it's rocket science, but we make it really easy to deploy bundles of schema and configuration values to different endpoints. So if I have a team that builds sort of my customer data, my CRM team, they can define their schema and have that available as sort of like the whole thing, right? This is everything that we've got. And then it's very easy for another team to come along and say, take that schema and strip out and make it fit exactly what they want and deploy just that to their own endpoint so that they're not having to follow that whole main schema. And you can tie those things together. Since it's all configuration driven, it's fairly easy to build up automation around this for sort of a CI/CD process as well, so that you can get kind of the controls in place to make sure that changes aren't happening kind of the willy-nilly. And a lot of that would apply more to sort of the enterprise space or a mid-sized company. We do have customers who are single application focused, that are using it primarily just to build GraphQL APIs for, in a sense, almost each page of their application, so that the front end doesn't have to do any kind of business logic as well, right? So it's everything is designed so that when I navigate from page to page, there's a GraphQL query that goes along with that. If I'm making a change, there's a mutation that comes in and says, okay, here's what we're submitting. When the user does X, this is everything that happens. And when the user goes here, this is everything that we need. And it moves that business logic into sort of a schema definition, so that it makes it very, very easy for them to control on the backside and make sure that the app behaves the way that they want. Okay.
So at this point, I have questions, but I think the easiest thing would be to just start looking at it. Yeah. So before we do that, though, I want to do a quick round of congratulations. First of all, chat, that was easily the most chaotic opening that we've done on the show in weeks. You hit every single piece of chaos available in the overlay. Well done. And Carlos, like a pro, you didn't even flinch. You just handled the madness and carried on. So congratulations to everybody. You all did great. So let's switch over to the pair programming view here, and let's do a shout out to our live captioning. We've had Amanda with us since the jump doing live captioning, and she's here from White Coat Captioning. Thank you so much. Captioning is made possible through the support of our sponsors. Netlify, Fauna, Hasura, and Auth0 are all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. It means a lot to me. I appreciate it. And today we are talking to Carlos, so make sure you go and give him a follow on Twitter. We are also going to be using StepZen, so go and check that on out. Okay, so at this point, we've talked about what StepZen is. We've talked about the benefits of GraphQL, and I think at this point, the easiest thing that we can do to go further is to actually start using this thing. So what are my first steps if I want to get it started?
Yeah, so let's assume that you've kind of looked at the website and you've said, "Oh yeah, this sounds kind of interesting. I want to poke at it. I can try to do a few different things." And you've read all our marketing bits. Just click sign up in the upper right there, and you can sign in with GitHub.
Alrighty.
Right now, what we're doing is we've got an account that we will hand you. So you probably don't want to go to my account right now because you'll reveal some keys. So if you want to do that off screen, that would be handy. And those are essentially your credentials to log in to the system. We have
Got it. Okay, let me create a new project here.
You hackers,
you
you dirty hackers.
Do I need to like use a generator to create this?
Not yet, but we probably do need to install the CLI. So let's start with that. So
let me do this real quick. What I will do is I'm gonna open up just a place where I can drop these keys.
I nearly forgot. I do have a little starter repo in our samples directory, which it doesn't do much, but it's got a little bit of information in there that will help us as we start to build something out.
Okay.
So once you're ready, let's clone that into a directory.
Okay.
And then we can install the CLI, and then we can go from there.
All right. So I have stored those. Is there a place that I go to get? Should I just leave this off screen here?
Which I'm not sure which is which.
I'm sorry, I'm in the my account, so I've copied the admin and API keys out in a place where I can get them again.
Okay.
You're
gonna need your account name, which should be a city name of some sort,
and your
admin API key. Those are the only things that you'll need to log in with, and then we won't need those again.
Okay. And so next I'm going to let me pull up.
You hackers, you dirty hackers.
So I now have I have my keys. I'm ready, and I'm ready to get started. Is a quick start the right place to go? Or you said CLI?
It's essentially going to walk you through installing the CLI. So let's just do that.
StepZen CLI. Okay, so I'm going to run npm install. Let me get this a little bit higher and this a little bit lower so we can actually see what's going on.
It even works if you wanted to use the copy button, but you never know.
Copy button. I could have hit that.
You can always sneak stuff into your paste buffer though. So this should just take a second. And it requires node 14. We're probably okay there. There's probably a couple of warnings, but I think we're okay.
Let me just.
Ooh, yeah. Can you pop over to 14?
Yeah, definitely.
And then let's redo that.
Nope. Here we go. StepZen.
I love Node for hacking and playing around. I'm less in love with it when it comes to stuff like this because there's so many version changes. Okay, so now we're here. You can do a StepZen login. And it should prompt you for your account name, which you copied.
Okay. And then I need an admin key, so I'm going to pull this off screen.
It masks it, but...
it does mask it. Okay, let me...
Yeah. It's just the web page doesn't mask it.
Got it. Okay.
There you go.
I have successfully logged in.
Okay, so now you're logged in. So what we should do now is let's clone that starter project, that starter repo. So if you've got the GitHub, yep, there you go. And it's under StepZen-samples. And it's called starter.
Okay.
And you can throw that right in this directory if you want, or
I'm going to call this one StepZen so that I actually remember what it is.
cool.
And let's get in there.
Go in there, and then we can either poke around on the. There is no npm install. It's just stuff. Yeah.
Oh, it's no npm install, huh?
No, we're all just configuration at this point. And
okay, I got you.
Is going to take this bundle and upload it and create an endpoint for us when we do that.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me make this a little bit easier to scan. Make this a bit smaller. Okay, so we're in the README. Inside of the README, I see sample GraphQL.
Yep. So everything's commented out, but this is just GraphQL schema. There is a couple little thing, and then this is the configuration file sample right now. That where we would put API keys or data source names or anything that's secret that we want StepZen to know about, but we don't necessarily want to anyone else to know about. So we can share schemas with each other and not share the config. So you could build a really cool schema that does a bunch of stuff and says, hey, you need to use fauna and you need to use this API and that API. Here, I'll share it with you. And somebody would say, okay, I just need to go and create the configuration on my side and you could use the same stuff.
Gotcha.
Cool.
Okay. So, so looking at this, we've got our index.
Index is where we kind of, that is going to essentially collect all of the other SDL files that we want to use. Samples in there right now. We can take that out when we actually upload something.
Okay.
We'll build a new schema. I figure we'll just start from scratch and let's start going. And what I thought we would do is let's call it weather.graphql. We'll build a weather API.
Okay.
Which I know is a little dull because there's a ton but there are a ton of companies that do weather APIs. We'll do one for free. It'll be US weather only because we use the government services.
Okay.
But this will show us a couple of different things that we can do with StepZen that are sort of unique, and hopefully give you a chance to come up with some interesting questions and things like that. Okay, so first, let's find a search window and just type in NWS API, and that should get us to what we need to look at to pull things in. So, and it is, that one. Top hit, weather.gov. So this is sort of the process that I'm thinking of. I've got an API I want to use. I want to pull it into my GraphQL schema. How do I do that? Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to go and learn how to use that API, right? That's something that is still kind of there. And let's look at this. Let's jump right over to examples because there's a lot of, it's government. There's a lot of words. And so here, how do I get the forecast? This is what we want to do. We want to get the forecast. So it looks like we have to make that kind of a call with an office and a grid X and a grid Y, but we don't know that. Yep, you're jumping to the right spot. So we actually need to make two calls to get the forecast. We need to take, given a lat long, and we need to get the office, and then we need to use that office to get the forecast.
Okay.
So let's make that first call. And if you just take the example API they have in there, let's look at what that pulls up. The one for the points, the one down below, not the forecast.
Oh, the one for the points.
Yep. So we're going to do that first. The process is we'll take in a lat long, we'll get the office, and then we'll get the office and we'll get the forecast.
Gotcha.
Okay. So simple REST API stuff. What we want to do is scroll down here a little bit and find the data that we want. So it's a little, I might need to put on glasses.
Yeah, let me make it bigger.
Point. Scroll down a little bit more. Okay, so this is starting to look good. Properties. Right, this is a top level element of the.
Oh, hey, look, those look familiar.
And look at the thing right above it, top. Right, that looks like the office name, but they've called it grid ID. Okay, so we've got grid ID, grid X, and grid Y. One's a string, and the other two look like ints. So let's go back over to code and let's create a GraphQL type that'll capture just that information because that's all we care about.
Okay. So back to here, I'm going to do. What should I call this one, do you think?
I would call this WX point because it's actually what it's called in their stuff.
Okay.
You could call it anything. But so then we need a grid ID.
And that is a string. And is this like standard GraphQL definition? Like I mark it as required and
Yep.
Then we have a grid X. That is a int?
Yeah, int.
Grid Y, int. Anything else?
Nope, that's all we need right now because that's all we're really going to just grab that data. Now we could do more, and we could let And we've got some tooling that will sort of auto hoover in these these JSONs and sort of build you a sample schema, but we're not going to use any of that stuff today. Okay, so we've got a type defined. Now we need to tell StepZen, okay, well, how do I call and get that type? So let's make a new type query and build a query for it right in here. And it's handy that you know what you're doing, because otherwise I would be saying a lot of letters. So let's call this query, let's just call it get WX point, for example.
Okay.
And it's going to take in 2 arguments, right? Which one is the lat, and that's a long...
Is float a valid?
Float, yep, float, sorry. Exactly, float is right. And then LNG, or whatever you want to call it, actually. Yeah, perfect. Oh, and we need to tell it what
Oh, wait, no, it should be LNG. That's going to make more sense, I think, for...
It'll be easier when we do stuff later on, but we have ways around that too. So right after that close paran, put a colon, we need to tell it the type that we're returning with this query.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. Okay,
Standard
and that's
stuff,
going to
right?
return a WX point, right?
WX point, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. I don't know if you need the not null there. It doesn't matter. That's fine. Okay. Open your curly brace. Wait.
No, I think that, yeah, this was me getting myself confused because
Gotcha.
this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we need to tell StepZen. So we've got a query, but StepZen still doesn't really know what to do, right?
Mhm.
It's like, I know there's a query that takes these parameters and I'm going to get data from somewhere. So it could be coming from anywhere at this point. So now we're going to introduce one of the StepZen directives called at rest. And you can essentially decorate that right there. Yep. Exactly. So what does a REST call need to know? Well, it needs to know the endpoint that it's going to call. So, and it's too bad we don't have our StepZen plugin ready, but we'd be able to IntelliSense a lot of this stuff for you too. So endpoint, just copy that URL that you called right here. Yep, just
this
copy
one.
Yep, just copy that sucker and just drop it right in there. Okay. Now, obviously, we're not going to call the same thing every time. We need to pump in those variables from the query. And so the way we do that is with a $ and a var name. So it'll be $ lat and $LNG. There's one trick here. Because this URL has a comma in it, we need to be really clear telling StepZen where our variable ends. So put a semicolon right after lat. Because what happens otherwise, it gets a little confused. So
right. They would pick that up as a word character or whatever.
Yeah, that should be good. Now, the next thing we need to do, so StepZen knows now how, given a lat and long, how do I make a call to get this data? Now we need to tell it, how do I take what comes back and put it into the type that I'm expecting to return, right? So if we look at the JSON for the response again in the browser window, we'll see that these grid X, grid Y, and that
so
other
it's
thing
going to be like response.properties.gridx.gridY.
Yeah, you don't even need to do that much though. So let's go back to the code.
Back to the code.
We'll just type in the name of this argument for the REST connector is called result root, all one word, lowercase. And there we just need to tell it properties.
Okay. That's I like that. This is intuitive. Like this makes sense to me.
Once you play with it, it gets more and more intuitive. Trust me, there are some gotchas that'll come up. Okay, so if we save this, save this file, go over to our index.graphql and change that to say weather.
Okay.
There you go. Save that. Now, if you pop open a terminal here, and you can just type StepZen start. So this will do a couple of things. One, it'll validate your schema to make sure that there's no missing types. Oh, the first thing it's going to ask you, where do you want to put it? So it gives you a name. You can change it. I usually, do something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And now it's deploying it. And it's going to take over your browser here. It
took me to, let me just copy paste this out actually.
Yeah, make sure you get it there. If you look at your terminal window, it tells you that it's actually deployed it to a live URL. So it's right there, right? East Hills. So that's where all this stuff is deployed. What we do is we pop up a local proxy. So it's really easy to just kind of do a query with graphical. So you can kind of validate and see that it works. So if you hop over to that localhost window and click the Explorer button,
Oh, I love that you put the Explorer in here.
Yeah, so there it is. And now you need to use numbers that are in the US.
Okay, so let's look at, let's get like, let's see, I'm in Portland.
Which I'd have to guess is, yeah, like a 45 and a 122, minus 122.
Okay, so if I put in 45 and then I put in 122, it's minus 122 to go west, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, and then I want to get the grid, X and Y.
Boom.
Look at it go.
It kind of looks like the 3-letter code for a Portland office, right?
Yeah. Okay, so then if and we can validate this pretty quickly, right? Because we can just go run this query. So let's change this out to be PQR and then 112, 102.
Yeah. Yep.
112, 102. And let's see how the weather looks in Portland.
So it's going to be down under the properties, periods, and then they have basically today, tonight, etc. And you can see.
Yeah.
Cool, right?
Yeah, and this looks, I mean, this all looks, yeah, this looks like the
accurate. Anyway.
Let's look at Portland weather.
I have not.
Let's go to the weather.
Behind the scenes, I'm not monitoring your account on the StepZen side and frantically typing in the results when you send it.
No, this is really cool, right? So now we have we've got the right thing coming back.
Yep.
It's pulling up a forecast that looks accurate.
Yep.
And you know, that's just from the weather service, not from us, but right. It's doing the right thing. This is cool. So this is really cool.
So we made one API call, but we need to make the other one, right?
Right.
If all I did was this wouldn't be that useful of a GraphQL API.
Sure,
right?
sure.
I mean, it's like, okay, I can get this from a browser too. So let's go back and add one that makes that weather call.
Okay.
So we're going to need a type for the forecast. And we can make this as complete or as not as you want. But if you look at the properties or the, what was the name of it? Periods. I think these are the fields that we're going to want to add. So we'll do number, name, you know, and if you just want to copy and paste those and quickly eliminate, yeah, there you go. And that's going to be an int. There's a couple other things we can talk about here too while we're doing this that's useful.
Let's go with.
Oh, grab start time and end time though, because then I get to talk about a StepZen thing.
Okay. Do you want me to put these in as like date times or?
Yeah, exactly. We've got a date time and we'll do coercion into a date time for you.
Okay, then we want to grab the temperature and that's going to be, I wonder if it goes.
I put float when I did it myself because I wasn't sure. I've only seen ints, but you know, doesn't hurt to.
And then it was
for stuff.
Temperature unit. It's going to be a string.
A string. What
else do we need? I don't think we need wind or anything.
You know what? Short forecast is nice and detailed forecast. If you were going to build a web app, icon is cool because you'd have a little thing you could drop on your page. But, you know, this is essentially we're getting a little repetitive at this point, I guess. But if you wanted it to be useful, I would grab all the fields and you know, then I can do whatever I want to.
Okay. That
cool.
Seems useful.
Yep. So there's your type. Oh, there's one other thing. Let's look at one other thing just quickly I wanted to point out. On that response, there was a null in there under temperature trend, right? So we don't really know what type that is.
Mm-hmm.
So how would we do that on the StepZen side? We've got a type called JSON, all caps, so that it basically tells StepZen, oh, if you see a JSON type and something comes in here, just whatever's there, flump it in as JSON. So it will, you know, if it's a nested structure, it'll pull that in. If sometimes it's a string, it'll be a string, etc. Right?
Okay. Great. Yeah, and we can leave it as nullable since it might come in null.
On these types, a lot of times, I mean, unless you get into sort of the real, everything is strongly typed and I know my specifics, when I'm just screwing around, I usually leave most of the type stuff as nullable because a lot of times with a REST API, there's not a lot of rules. And sometimes you're going to see it's like, oh, if I ask for the weather in Portland, they always null this thing out for whatever reason. Who knows?
No parents, no rules.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we've got our type in place. Let's make a query to pull that type out.
So okay, so my query to pull that type out is going to be get forecast.
I call it get point forecast because we're going to do something a little more fun a little bit later on, assuming we have time, which I think we will.
Okay.
And what do we need when we make that call? We need the office. Let's call it office just for fun. String. Yep. And then we need a grid X and a grid Y.
Grid X was an int. Grid Y is also an int.
Yep.
And that is going to return a forecast, or is this going to return an array of forecasts?
An array of forecasts, exactly. So bracket those. There you go.
Okay. And so for folks who aren't familiar with this, this ensures that we don't get any null results and that we don't get a null object, but we can get an empty array. So it'll either be an empty array, or if it's not empty, everything inside the array will be a forecast. This one was hard for me when I first looked at it, because I was like, well, doesn't that mean it's going to fail if it's empty? No, it just means it'll fail if it tries to return something that we're not expecting, which is either an empty array or an array of forecasts.
Yep. And this is all super valuable stuff with GraphQL that I have to admit, I usually don't take advantage of because I'm lazy. And I just let things null out, especially when I'm building something. And then you can always go back and tighten this stuff up. That's kind of another nice thing about, not having to build resolvers for a lot of this, is that, you just let the schema do the work. Okay. So this is at rest again. And you can just drop it right underneath it if you want. There you go. Endpoint, I would do the same thing. We're going to just copy over that URL and replace the values.
Okay, so this one is office.
Yep.
This one is grid X, and this one is grid Y.
Yep. And again, because of that comma in there, I dropped that in there just to make sure we don't get confused. And the result root on this is a little bit different because it's under properties.
Properties, periods.
Under periods. So I'm gonna let you guess.
But so now this one, it's an array. So I'm wondering if it's like this, or I'm wondering if it's more like this.
It's close to both of those. It's not either though. So it is properties, not periods, and then just throw brackets at the end of it, telling it that we're gonna look for a list.
Gotcha.
Yep. And that should be it. So if we save, is your terminal still running?
Good question. Yes, it is.
Okay. So if you save, it will auto deploy. And then if you reload this guy, we should see a new, there you go.
Cool. Okay. So we had figured out that it was PQR 112.102. So 112.102 PQR. And let's get all of it.
Sure. Hey, look at that.
Cool. Okay, so and we can see it gave us back an array, and each of these is one of these periods objects.
Yep, exactly.
That's cool.
Cool. So we've kind of got a free weather API, at least for the US, right? I can take a lat long. I can get myself a forecast, and the National Weather Service has a lot of data. So you could start to do the same type of thing to build out all kinds of fun stuff. And it's all free, which is awesome. But this is still, I don't think this is great still, right? Because I'm making two calls. If I have a lat long, then I'm making, I get my office, and then I get my point forecast. So let's make a third query that combines those two together in one. So we don't need any new types because we're all doing the same thing. So let's call this query get forecast.
All right.
And this one's going to take a lat and a long of floats.
Okay.
Just like that. Exactly.
Let me take a guess. And then because of that, we're going to be able to do this. Is that right?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. So now we need to tell StepZen how is it going to solve this. It's not making a REST call. What it's doing is it's doing something we call a sequence. So it's at sequence. And the first thing, if I remember correctly, is steps. So yeah, sequence has steps. So steps. I think we missed an opportunity to call it steps with a Z, but that's just me. In there, we've got curly braces.
Curly braces.
No, you were right. You've got
the
list, and then each of the steps is within a curly brace. So we're going to do a query for the first step. So it's just query, colon, and the name of the query in quotes, which is get WX point. So StepZen is going to do that first. Now
Okay.
we make another step. And I'm going to make a mistake intentionally just to show you something. And then this is get point forecast.
Okay.
Now, if you guess what the mistake is, that's awesome. But you go ahead and save this, and it'll try to upload, and we should get an error on your console. There you go. So what
wxpoint.office does not exist.
Yeah, so it doesn't know how to find office out of what we gave it. And
because we need to map that. We need to map grid ID to office.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay,
So
but I'm already pretty impressed here because it got everything else.
Well, it does that, it's because it's GraphQL, it's the schema, right? It can look at it and say, oh, this takes this and I'm getting this, and yeah, it doesn't match. So there's another attribute of this step that we add called arguments. And again, the square brackets, curly brackets, because this could be a list of things. And what do we call this one? I think it's name. So what's the argument name first off? Oh, no, it's just name, not quotes.
Oh, right. I don't know what I'm doing here.
No, I do that all the time. What is the argument name? It's office. And then we have something called field. What field do we find office in? So field, and that is grid ID. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see if it's giving us errors now. It is not.
Happy. So
get forecast.
Query.
Okay, now my latitude, longitude. I'm gonna go 45, and it was negative 122.
Roughly good. Oh, that's gonna be a null, right?
Oh, right. That's the one. That's the only one that we didn't want.
The one that comes back null. There you go.
Okay.
So so basically StepZen, and we do caching on our side too. So what happened was we hit off 2 queries. That's why this one was so quick when it came back the second time. Ran it the first time, got the point, got the forecast, and then you just asked for different fields, but it was essentially the same calls that were going out the backside. So we could serve all that up from cache.
Gotcha.
At that point. So cool, right? Now we've got something that actually is, if I had to do this on a web page, I'd be like, okay, hold on, let me whip out Axios or whatever, and I'm doing a get to get my thing, and I'm parsing that, and it's like, okay, now what fields do I need? I grab those, and none of this is impossible, but it's nice to do it just in one simple GraphQL call.
Well, what I like about this is that it's, there's plumbing happening here, right? Yeah. Like where for me as a front end developer, I want to get a list of the forecasts so that I can show it on a page.
Yep.
I don't really want to think about how to make this call to this call to this call, and more importantly, like a huge problem that I used to have when I was working at IBM. Actually, one of the reasons we went toward GraphQL. We didn't have good training for front-end developers to do like all these REST calls. And so they all built them differently. They would use different tools. They would mismatch libraries. So we'd have like 3 versions of Axios deployed to our front end, or we would have, one person would be using caching and it was done well, and one person would be making that same request 50 times because they needed like that source data to make a subsequent request for comments, and they didn't know how to cache. It wasn't part of their experience or expertise. So they would just make that call every time. And if the API wasn't caching for them, they didn't know any better. They just, hit, and suddenly we're hammering our APIs with our front ends. Yeah. And it was, it's nobody's fault. It's just a lack of training, we're taking somebody out of their expertise. Yep. So by going to GraphQL, now I would have a hard time accidentally being inefficient here.
It's still possible. Trust me.
Sure.
Done it. But if you're smart about it, you absolutely would. And if you were on, say, a team that was really thinking about how are we going to do this, you would say, okay, here's what we want on the front end. So you design, your types and your queries from sort of a front end perspective. And then you would think, okay, how do we map these up on the back end? And you would start to get the back end folks could do that, so that you actually get, rather than one side just owning the whole thing, right? You sort of separate out that knowledge and make sure that the people who have the most at stake, really, because the front end, honestly, I'm a front end guy sometimes too, and I really don't care if I hammer an API 100 times or one time, if it works, right? I'm solving a problem, it works. If performance is okay, great. But the backend guys, absolutely, I might be paying for some of those calls.
Right.
Cost money. So I really do care. So separating that out, I think, is super useful. Now, there's another thing I could show you here, because this isn't great either, right? I'd really love to just type in an address.
Oh, I would love to be able to put in like a city name or something. Yeah.
Geolocation API. So I shared an API key with you earlier.
Yes. Let me go grab that one.
Because there's a couple of things we haven't done. We haven't put any kind of secrets into this, right? So we haven't seen how that works. We should kind of show how, if somebody needs to do that, they can do that. And then there's another directive that's really powerful that I wanted to show you as well. So this one I'm using, the API I'm using is called, it's by a company called Here. And it's pretty straightforward. But what I thought I would do is I would just kind of tell you what, because
is that this one here?
From here? Yeah. No offense to these guys, but the docs are a little bit troublesome to navigate. So it might be quicker if I just tell you what to type in, because there's not that much stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Or I could message it to you too, I guess. But let's get a geolocation thing working. So let's go over to code, VS Code, and let's make a new file called location.graphql.
Location.graph. If I can spell it. The thing I like the least about GraphQL is having to type PHQL. I never ever get it right. Okay.
Okay. So here we're going to put it in a type that is, let's just call it address.
Address.
Or no, location. That's fine. You be you. And then we wanted to have a title, which is a string, because this is kind of nice to see sometimes. And these, again, this is just coming from the Here API stuff. And then a lat and a long, which are floats.
Okay.
Anything
else?
Nope. That's it. That's all we need. The Here API does a ton of great stuff. It's a fantastic API, fast, lots of information, but this is all we really care about here. So let's call it, locate, I guess. And it takes, or whatever you want to call it. The name doesn't matter too much. It's easy. It takes a single parameter called Q.
Q.
Yeah, let's call it.
Like query.
Because it doesn't have to be city.
Yeah. Okay, I get you.
Really nice for a web app, right? Just one box. Where do you want the weather? And it can be a city or whatever. And that's going to return a location. Yep. Okay. So now we do at rest again. And I'll tell you the endpoint is, there you go.
And it was result root.
Yep.
Okay.
We do need result root. There's going to be two other things we need because there's a little bit of a trick here. Endpoint is HTTPS geocode .search .here API .com /v1 /geocode. This is the most boring part of the stream so far, I think. And then question mark. And there's two parameters we're going to use. API key.
Like this or lowercase?
Well, lower. It doesn't matter. We're deciding what it is, but it should just be lowercase according to them. I don't think they care, but equals $ API key. And Q equals Q, $Q. And you don't need the semicolon. No,
I don't need
the semicolon there. It's only when you're doing something kind of funky with injecting it into. There you go.
Okay, so we've got. There's our big thing, just double checking /v1 /geocode, and then we send an API key equals our API key variable that we have not set,
no, right.
And Q, which will be this one, which is a query string.
Yep. So result root is going to be items with square brackets.
Okay. Oh, does this need to be an array then?
No, we're okay. We're just going to take the first one. I've seen it return, like if you put in Sao Paulo, for example, or something, or Sao Paulo, there's a bunch of those cities in the world, so you can get multiples, but we'll just worry about one.
Okay.
And then we're doing something else. The way this response is, it's a little bit of nested JSON. So the title is sort of like, here's the address we matched. And then they've got a position element, which inside of it has a lat and a long. And What I want to do is pull those up to the top type. This is something that you might end up doing for various reasons. But the way we do that is with an attribute called setters. So new line and call it setters. And this again is a list of things. So, and in curly braces, we are setting a field called lat. And that is in a path. There's a path called, and that is going to be position.lat.
Okay, so let me walk through this to make sure I understand what we're doing. So
Yep.
what we're getting back from the API is we're going to get back items, and then items is going to be an array, and each inside each one we're going to get a name, and then we'll get a position.
Yep.
And inside that we're going to get lat.
Yep.
And long.
Exactly.
Okay. And so what we've done here,
the API key, we would have taken a look at it. You could have seen it, but just in the interest of time, I wanted to.
And so what we've done here is we've basically said, okay, you're going to get this result, and the result root is items. So once we've done that, then it's going to go in and it's going to take us down to this point. So now this is what's being sent in to our fields for each entry. And then we're saying for the lat, which is this one, we want to find that at position.lat, which brings us into this object here.
Yep.
So that's good. Okay. All right. That makes sense. I can follow that. And so then to do the longitude, we'll do the same thing.
Yep. And this admittedly is a bit of a, I've kind of set it up so that I can talk about this thing, obviously, but I wanted to make sure that we understood that there are also ways, rather than just grabbing the structure, we can pick and choose and pull things out. And you can even do this without the result root and just set paths on all the fields if you have to really get surgical and pull in there.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's just a different way of kind of getting at that data. Okay, so there's one more thing we need for the rest thing so that it understands, because as you mentioned, we don't have the API key variable anymore. So we need a configuration.
Like fully spelled out?
Yep, fully spelled out, and we give it a name, call it here API, call it whatever you want. Oh, it just in text. It's just a string.
Oh, like like we're basically defining a key in the config doc, and it's going to go look. I understand. Okay. So
and
then that means I need to go in
there. Yeah.
Here?
So
no.
Exactly. Except we need to call it this one. We need to rename it to config.yaml. And then the name is going to be, you just pick that sucker and rename it. And you can leave the other one there. It's fine. And this is going to be API key. And then we want to paste in that API key I gave you. And if you leak it, that's fine. I can kill it later.
Can we set that as like a environment variable or something?
Yeah, we can. It's got to be prefixed with StepZen underscore. So do StepZen underscore API key or here key or whatever.
Like that?
Yep. And then set an environment variable to that API key.
Okay. So if you're okay to roll the key, then I'll just put it in. But so what we would do is like we could run this as like in here we could do StepZen.
Yep.
Here API key.
Yep.
You hackers, you dirty
key,
hackers.
And then we would run StepZen start, and that would let us pull it. And then when we deploy, we would need to set this. We would just set this in StepZen, or where do we set it for it to get picked up by StepZen?
So what the CLI does when you're doing this is it says, hey, I see a value in the config file. It's StepZen underscore. This looks like an environment variable. So I'm going to see if there's any environment variables I can substitute in when I actually upload it to StepZen, to the cloud service.
Okay.
There's a few different theories about kind of how you really want to run things. But typically it's just the config.yaml holds secrets, and that's not something I would check into GitHub, etc. It's something that I just manage through another process. And we've got a Netlify build plugin that will take and do some of this stuff too. So if you've got a process, it'll do that sort of thing.
Okay.
Okay. So where are we? We still need to add this location.graphql to our index before we do anything. So it should be all set to go. So add location.graphql. And we're almost near the end here, I think. Save this sucker. We should
There
see
it goes.
Hopefully it works. Looks like it works.
Okay.
If we referenced a config name that didn't exist in our config, StepZen would yell at us too. It would say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
So now if you just throw in a,
what's
Portland
a
address or
you just put in like
free
Portland?
Yeah, just type what you want. And yeah, there you go. There it is.
Look at it go.
It's pretty quick, right?
Okay. So now I want to wire these up. I want to make this thing all the way automated. So if I go back in here, can I simplify this even further and just say like city?
You totally could do that.
Okay.
You could totally do it that way. Or the other thing you could do is you could go into location, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go up into the type. This is a different way to do this. Right there, the type of location. Let's add a new field to that and call it forecast.
Yes. Okay. I like this.
And this is going to be an array of forecasts, right? Or a list. There you go. And then this uses another directive we've got called @materializer.
Okay.
Great name. And now we just tell it what query to use.
Materializer sounds a lot like what I would name a metal band.
Yeah, I love it. Materializer.
And so this one would be called get forecast, and we already have a lat and long, so we shouldn't have to change anything, right? It should just work.
You can do the same thing here though, right? If fields were named wrong, we could say, oh, you know what? Actually, the argument for this query is here.
We could map them with arguments.
We could do that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So now
you see
this is exciting.
There, right? So now I do Portland, Oregon, and I can just, you don't even care about
I don't care about the latitude and longitude anymore. I just want
short forecast,
the short forecast, temperature, and the unit. Or I guess probably the
name is nice because it tells you what name is the thing that gives you like tonight, tomorrow, etc.
Oh yeah, that's a good call.
And again, that's a little bit of backend knowledge that comes through, but right there you go.
Look at this. So now we can say I want the weather for Portland.
Yep.
And it pulls through. Yeah. And so, I could get more thoughtful with my query names and stuff and just say like I want to get the weather and put in the name or something like, this is so cool. I love like and here's what I think is magical about this is like what we just did is the sort of thing that has to happen one time. Yeah. When you start thinking about the way that something really does come together like that, the way that orchestration works. For the people who are using this on the front end, because we've got caching in place, because we've got the field mapping and everything, what this does for the front end team is it basically turns this into a non-issue. You don't even need to know that this is pulling from 2 separate APIs and 3 separate API calls. You're just saying, we want people to be able to search for their city or whatever, and then pull in their what so like let's look at let's find an address in Portland. Here's a great restaurant. So we're gonna pull in, where's their address? 734 East Burnside, Portland, Oregon. All right, so we're gonna go to Kennard tonight and get some delicious steam burgers. And so I'm going to search for the weather. So now in my my weather app, or in my restaurant app, for example, I could say like, where do you want to go tonight? And you could go to make your reservation and do this search. And I could just say like, hey, you can eat outside tonight. It's going to be clear and nice. Like kind of warm.
Yeah, exactly. And you could even, we didn't do it, but Maps has got a great API as well, Google Maps. So
it does.
Hey, I want to find a restaurant in Portland,
mm-hmm.
and then I want to see what the weather's going to be like over the next 3 days. I mean, you can do a lot of this stuff and put it all into one API, so that all of that logic in terms of what the experience that I want to build the user, it lives in my call, right? I don't have to worry about managing keys, etc., all of that stuff, and then. Yeah, this may work.
It does work. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so this here API, you could just search for a restaurant. I mean, that's really cool. And like if we wanted to go to a different city, like what's another What's the weather like in Chicago today? Mostly sunny. Not yeah. So okay. I don't think Alinea has a patio, but you could eat on the patio at Alinea tonight too.
Nice. Yep, exactly. And so we just worked with the REST connector in that sample schema, the stuff that was commented out. I had examples of a couple of other things that we can do. If you look down in the queries, there's REST, and then we can take in a GraphQL endpoint or a DB query. We can hit databases directly as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah.
A lot of that stuff.
And then if I want to limit, like if my user type, for example, came back with, you said 1,300 columns.
Yep.
I could define an interface that says just the ones to grab, and it'll auto trim. That's what this would do?
Even if you do the type that way, the interface is more interesting when you've got, say, two different backends that maybe provide the same data.
Mm-hmm.
And you want essentially to say, here's my interface for what, say, shipment tracking is, right? And then I've got a FedEx tracker and a UPS tracker type and all this, and they may have extra fields, but they all satisfy that core interface.
Yeah.
And then I can do, what's the GraphQL word for it? Conditional. It doesn't matter too much, but I can basically say, hey, I'm going to be getting delivery status. If the type actually happens to be UPS, I want this extra field from UPS.
Oh, yeah. I get what you mean. Like the fragments.
Fragments, that's the word. Exactly. Yep. So you can do a lot of fun stuff. We just kind of touched the surface of sort of a simple, hey, I've got some APIs and I want to put them together.
This is really, really powerful stuff. And I can see, the benefit here is, like, one of the things that's challenging about GraphQL is when you start looking at the construction of it as building the GraphQL system. There's the schema.
Yep.
Then there are resolvers. Yep. And then there's the server, right? Yeah. And what I like here is that this is, it's config driven, and that's always a decision that you got to make as a team. Absolutely. Are we going to be like config as code or how do we want to do this? But what I like about this is that for a lot of the 80% use cases, this removes the need to go and build resolvers because you can define the whole thing in one place. You've got your SDL, and you're able to just map things one to the other using these directives.
Yep.
That feels very convenient. And if I'm thinking about I've got a bunch of services and we need to make complex calls with these services, I don't necessarily want to have to maintain a bunch of custom resolvers when I could just do something like this and say, yeah, just throw this one, slam this query into this query into this query, and all of that turns into a great experience for the front end devs and for the user, and StepZen is going to automate the caching and stuff. So, we honestly we finished faster than I thought we would. This is this is pretty incredible. Is there anything else that you wanted to show off here?
We could do a database connection if you want. I have one. I don't necessarily know that it's that shocking, right? I've got a sample customers table that has addresses, and we connect to it, and now I get a list of customers, and then we can do a materializer again on the customer type that pulls in the weather for that address. It's more of the same essentially at that point, I think, especially since the viewers, we're not going to be able to look at the database, so you don't really know what's in there. You just see what comes out of StepZen, right? The only other thing I wanted to talk about was I think maybe, and this isn't a great thing to talk you through actually doing, but so the way these services, because we have a live API. So if you go and take your query and use a different tool to call that endpoint down at the bottom there, easthills.stepzen.net, you can hit that from a website, etc. Right now it's protected via header with an API key, and that is either your admin key or your service key, we call it. There are two keys. The admin key allows you to actually make changes to your schema. That's what the CLI uses when it uploads things. It uses your admin key. The API key or service key, and we can recycle these, and there's a bunch of them, is more used for just calling the queries, right?
Okay.
Or retrieving things. And
so what we could do here is we can go And let's hit this one. Deal with that later. So we can hit this API,
Yep.
and we're going to send in an authorization key. And now, so you're saying that that API key is read only?
Yeah, for you cannot make changes to the schema, etc., but you can run, essentially you can run any query that's defined. We didn't talk about mutations either. Obviously, we support mutations. So if you want to write data to a service or a REST API, you can map that out too.
And then do I just drop this straight in, or is it prefixed with bearer or anything like that?
It's prefixed with API key.
API key like that?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll drop in that API key. And then in my body, I can send it in raw and do a query. That's how that works, I'm pretty sure. And then we can take this query here. Let's see if that explodes on me. It probably will. And then variables is going to be empty. Bad request, and it's a bad request.
It doesn't like that. It doesn't like that body.
Yeah, we got to take all these out.
I haven't used Postman, but they do have that little GraphQL button in the type, and I don't know if that is smart enough to just do it for you.
Just me not reading things. Let's try that.
There you go. Cool.
Beautiful. Look at it go, everyone. And then if I don't have that header, if I turn this header off.
If you turn it off, you should get a 401.
Ta-da!
However, the thing that if we had enough time, I would show you, you can define, so I may have a schema with, actually your schema right now has all those other queries in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in my config file, I can define something we call a predicate, which essentially says, and we sort of give it a query template, and we can decide whether to allow or deny that template. So we can basically say, all that you can do with this endpoint is call forecast or call locate. That's the only query you could call.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't need an API key. So you can set it up so that if you've got a bunch of different query methods in your schema, but you have one that you want to use on say like a Jamstack site, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to have to worry about managing my API keys, environment variables, anything like that. You can use this idea of a predicate and essentially open up just a slim little portion of your schema to the world. Well,
I mean, we got 17 minutes, Carlos. You think we can do it?
Oh, I'm gonna have to find an example because
we definitely don't need to take those kind of risks. I think
let's try it. Let's try it.
Okay.
Let me just navigate over here a little bit to make sure that I get this right, and I may end up shooting this to you over Discord.
Okay.
Because it's a fair bit of typing.
So Tony is asking a question while you're looking for that, which is if we do open a predicate and someone who's not auth just spam that API, does that affect our usage? Like, would it contribute toward our usage limit?
I'm sorry?
Like, so I'm assuming that StepZen has a usage-based kind of model, like number of requests or something like that. So if we open up a predicate and then somebody else hammered that API,
yep,
it would hit our.
It counts.
Okay, so but that's a thing to consider. If we are not wanting that to happen, then we would want to keep using the API key,
and you'd want to secure it. Obviously, I don't think we necessarily have the whole trick with making things magically secure and perfect on the internet yet, because that's a big trick. But this does go a bit of the way for it. If you were concerned at all about anything like that, I would recommend still using some sort of a serverless function or something to call, so that you've got that layer of misdirection for anyone who wants to try to abuse things. And it's just another control point you can turn on and off.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to shoot this to you over Discord.
Okay.
We'll see. It's going to be YAML, so we'll see how
YAML.
How that works. And again, this is going to be I just want to say that this is sort of early.
YAML.
You should have that in there.
JSON.
This is going to be sort of early stuff. We haven't documented this yet, so we're kind of going under the covers a little bit.
Gotcha.
Let's try some different stuff. So then this rule set lives at the same level as the configuration set.
Okay. So we've got a rule set.
Yep. And I
the
copied
query
something from somewhere else. Yeah. So this actually enforces a very specific query. It was looking up my last FM tracks. So we need to change this query to manage so that it's only looking up the query that you want to run.
Okay.
So find your query and copy that sucker out.
There we go.
Why is your little straight up bar looks a little bit like a slash to me, but that's not what it is, right?
No, it's just getting highlighted for whatever reason.
Yep. So now the cool thing to do would be to use a variable. So like make a variable in get forecast.
Yep. Let's go with Q. That'll be a string, and then we'll drop in Q.
Yep. And so under rules, you could just change this predicate to be true, and it would allow any query, any parameter. But if you only wanted to allow looking up Portland, Oregon, for example, you could change that. Actually, you don't even need to use the variables thing. You just say the predicate is true at that point.
Okay.
And what this should do is it should just allow any get forecast query on that endpoint.
Okay. And so that is deploying. And so now I have my auth header in here. Let's
turn that.
Let's run this.
Oh yeah.
It works.
Should work.
Turn it off. Let's run this. Oh wait, it's because I didn't. I need to change the body to actually have the right name. So let me go to the body.
Yep, and it needs to use variables too to match.
Or we'll call this get forecast, and we're going to give it a Q string Q, and the variables now. It's going to be Q, and we'll say Le Pigeon, Portland, Oregon. I don't know why I'm only thinking of Gabe Rucker's restaurants today, but that's what I'm doing.
Ooh,
and look, it works. No authorization header.
Not at all. Yeah, so this is open at this point.
That's really cool stuff.
Pretty cool stuff. I think there's other things we have planned for this. So, using JOT tokens and introspecting parts of those. So if I get something set up where only logged in users can do certain queries, I can start to build predicates that do that stuff. Still to come, not finalized yet. This is a little bit early, but this is the kind of thing that I think is really slick when you let yourself kind of go of, I'm not going to write all the code for this. I'm just going to configure it, but I'm going to do some extra switches and flips. And now I can do a lot of really cool stuff without a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I can see, I can feel how powerful this is in the sense of like, I don't know what I did here with these like weird, whatever. I'm not going to think about that too hard. But we've got this very powerful, very cool setup here where I'm able to look at this and say, yes, I want it to work like this. I want people to be able to touch this one. I don't want people to have to go and think about what this actually, like what it works like, what it does. I just want them to be able to go and use it. Right.
Yeah.
And for something low risk.
Yep.
Right. Like a well cached, non-sensitive API, go ahead and hammer on it. It's cached. You can't hurt it. Right. For something that is more sensitive, we probably want to be more deliberate, require API key access. But what I like is that this is a really good on-ramp if like, I just want to expose an API for a service of mine, but I want to use the same API endpoint for like my privileged stuff and my unprivileged stuff.
Yep.
So that I can lock down all of the things that need to be behind an API key. So like changing user accounts, or maybe like to put that in a practical example, let's say I want to build my blog on StepZen and I'm using a database behind the hood. I want to be able to list blog posts because they're public, and I want anybody to be able to do that. So now there's an API that lets you get my blog posts. However, to change the publishing status of one of those blog posts to send that mutation, you need to have an API key to do that.
Yeah.
You need to prove that you have access to this. So that way I'd be able to have the same API exposed to everybody, but you have specific actions based on your API key that are additionally available to you.
Yep. The other thing you could do, super simple as well. We picked an endpoint to deploy this to when we started. We can change that at any time. And the other one is still available if you want it to be, right? You can basically take a schema that's complete and full and deploy it under one spot. And then, take portions of those files or trim the types or whatever, upload that new bundle. I haven't really done any work, right? I've just sort of edited my schema, upload that new bundle to a different endpoint. Now I have 2 endpoints. And I can decide what to do that way as well. So you get a lot of flexibility in terms of, rather than just having to write a service and it's there, and now I need to spin up another service and it's somewhere else.
Right.
Just point it to a different spot. And we take that bundle and essentially combine it into a single schema and serve it up from the endpoint that you ask it to come from.
That's super handy. Yeah. I mean, I love it. And Jacob Bolda in the chat is saying, like, if you do this and combine it with something like Cloudinary, you've basically created the value prop of Gatsby, which is like Gatsby's pulling all your data from all these different places together at build time.
Yep.
We can now do this at runtime.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking, one question I have is, like, let's say I did want a custom resolver. So we just showed how to wire together different services.
Yep.
What if I wanted to pull in, like, so Cloudinary has a fetch API, for example, where I could put any URL from around the web. I know we don't have time to do it, but we have this icon available to us here. What if I wanted to wrap that icon with a Cloudinary fetch call, which, would then become like, I don't know, Cloudinary icon or something like that. Right? And then I would want to be able to do that. Is that something I could just use StepZen to wire it up? And
yeah. Because so the materializer can be a query or a mutation too, right? So if I needed to actually make a change to something,
gotcha.
I should double check myself on that because I haven't tried it, but it depends on how you define that Cloudinary call, because you could just define it as a query, even though it's technically a mutation. But you could set it up so that it makes that API call, and it would just be materializer and drop in the new query, and it, what value do I pull in? Oh, I pull in the icon and I post that up to Cloudinary, and then Cloudinary is going to return something, and there's a type I have for that, and boom, I'm solid that way. So you can really start to play around with tying things together.
Nice.
There are
and it looks
edges
like
you can find where you're going to run into troubles, because I've been able to do that, but we're stomping them down as fast as we find them right now in terms of some of that stuff.
nice. And I see Anthony dropped a link in the chat about how to do WordPress and Cloudinary, and I'm assuming that includes how to plug that into StepZen. So we'll put that in the show notes if you want to go check that out.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we are out of time. Carlos, this was awesome. I think this is a really cool service. I think that it's if you are in the situation where you find yourself writing these kind of plumbing queries where you're plugging one thing into another thing and you need these value chains to get to data, I really like it. It seems like something that would be really powerful. If somebody wants to go further, where would you send them for next steps here?
Okay, so what I would do, sign up for an account and run through the docs. Our intro is okay in terms of touching a lot of different things. It's fairly straightforward, fairly simple, kind of gets you going fast. And then we've got a few different things along the left-hand side there about different things you can try. So if I want to connect backends, or if I'm messing with front ends, how do I make these calls to this stuff?
Nice.
StepZen samples org on GitHub also has a few different things in there. We're just sort of dropping things out there as we build them. And Anthony's on the team and doing a great job of populating some of that stuff out there. So we've got, a lot of times the stuff that we do on our blog leads to that. So I would look at that stuff, kind of see if there's something that piques your interest. And if there isn't, or if you have questions, we do have a Discord chat that you can find on our website. And we've got people looking at that all the time. So happy to jump in and connect with people. Yeah, we're at the stage right now where if you have a project that you want to work on and you get stuck, let us know, because we would love to help figure it out, because that helps us too, right? We start to see, it's like, okay, why did you have a problem? Or, ooh, that's a really interesting idea we didn't think of. Maybe we should think about how we can support that. So we love that kind of feedback.
Great. Yeah. Well, you heard it here. You can go straight in here and you can find Carlos to send him feedback directly on Twitter. You can also follow StepZen Dev if you want to send feedback that way. Anywhere else that you want people to check? Any other sources?
I think that's probably the best spot, that and the website, and give it a shot. We love the feedback. Hop on Discord and tell us what's good or what's bad. It's fantastic. All that stuff is good.
There is a Discord link here on the doc, so if you want to jump in there, you can get that. All right, so with that, let's do one more shout out. We have had Amanda with us all day doing live captioning. Thank you very much, Amanda. That is through White Coat Captioning, who's available for all your captioning needs. That's made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, Fauna, Hasura, Auth0, all kicking in a little bit to make this show more accessible to more people. Means a lot to me. I very deeply appreciate it. I hope you do as well. And that is always on the homepage of the site during episodes. While you're at the homepage, make sure you go and check out the schedule. We've got some really, really good stuff coming up. We're going to play a game called Battlesnake next week. I truthfully have no idea what I'm in for. I think it sounds like so much fun. Legit have no idea how it's going to work. I am terrified. Then we're going to do streaming data in PyTorch. I don't know anything about Python. This is going to be a great episode. We're going to do Twilio Quest, which is like a game that teaches you Twilio and like how to do different things. So this one I think is going to be super fun. I'm really excited about that. Modern CSS. We're going to do UX and UI. We're going to do Notion workflows for like content management, knowledge management. Next.js and Dynamics with Contentful, and like the list just goes on and on. Like there's so many good people coming up on the show. Make sure you go and check that out. Add on Google Calendar. It'll put it in your list and let you know what episodes are airing on what day, so you never miss one. Make sure you go to Twitch and smash that follow button, like and subscribe. What else are you supposed to do? Ring that bell. I don't know. This was super fun. Carlos, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Any parting words for the chat?
No, I just thank you, Jason. This was a great opportunity. I'm really, really happy that I had a chance to do it, and it was fun.
I had a blast. I'm always boop that horn, whatever it is that you do. Thank you all, chat, for hanging out. We're gonna go find somebody to raid. Carlos, thank you again. We will see you all next time.